Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be celebrating this absolute masterpiece here. Okay, if I can get it nice in the camera, so I might be able to use that as my thumbnail. The incredible LARKS Tongues in ASPIC by King Crimson. Now the question is, am I actually holding this album up correct? I think I am actually. I think that's the right way round. It could be like that, couldn't it? Or it could be like that. Or it could be like that. That's quite interesting, isn't it? That this album cover is like, it's one of those rare albums that we don't actually know which way round it goes. You know, there's the album coming out here. Here's the back with that incredible sort of King Crimson typeface that they also used on Starless and the Bible Black, which I like very much, and it's a sort of a incredible cover. I do love this cover. If I open it up, there's the inner sleeve for those of you who have never seen the vinyl. There we go. And we have the lyrics to 3 tunes, Exiles, Book of Saturday and Easy Money. There's 6 tunes on this album. 3 of them have vocals, 3 of them are instrumental. LARKS Tongues in ASPIC is, as was said, 50 years old. It was released back in 1973. I think in January or February, so a little bit over 50 years old now if you're watching this when it's come out. It was recorded at Command Studios in January and February 1973. I've just seen it on the back. So I imagine it was released round about now. I'm talking to you in March 2023. Shall we actually just go on and find the release date out? Because I find this quite interesting now, is the actual dates and times that albums come out. This album is the first album in the sort of revamped King Crimson. So King Crimson is one of the most important progressive rock bands. It's gone down in history as creating the album which everyone says invented progressive rock. Oh, this is weird. And it was released on the 23rd of March 1973, and I'm talking to you on the 24th of March 2023. So we're basically 50 years and a day since this was released when I'm filming this. What an incredible weird coincidence that is. It would have been weird if I'd done it yesterday, but I didn't. So yes, King Crimson, they come out with this very sort of orchestral, florid, English sound, which sort of it defines what progressive rock's going to be. What's interesting on the first album, and I have problems with In the Court of the Crimson King because I like the album. I absolutely love 21st Century Schizoid Man, and there's nothing else on there like that. There's a lot of sort of very doomy, quiet prog, and I'm not so keen on that. 21st Century Schizoid Man is this like sort of proto-heavy metal King Crimson that sort of then disappears on the following albums. We never hear that again. It crops up every now and then, but they're much more interested in a much more sort of classical based sort of English aesthetic approach to progressive rock. Fripp always seems to be very much about control. This is a guitarist that would architecturally build the music up from below. This is a sort of musician that would write his solos. You know, there's a certain approach to music here with King Crimson. In 1972-73, he obviously detects the rumblings that things must change in the progressive camp, and he is a visionary. So he decides to revamp King Crimson with a new lineup. Now this lineup, which contains David Cross on violin, John Wetton on bass and vocals, Bill Bruford from Yes on drums, and Jamie Muir on percussion and all sorts. Now Jamie Muir is the key musician on this album, because when we talk about this sort of second version of King Crimson, the darker, heavier metal, you know, sort of improvisatory, wild King Crimson that is the one I love. We are talking about 3 albums. This album's Larks, Tongues and Aspic. We're talking about Starless and the Bible Black, and we're talking about Red. Now, all of those 3 albums are actually entirely different. And the thing that makes this one different to the others is the inclusion of Jamie Muir. I'd like to talk a little bit about Jamie Muir. Jamie Muir has emerged not in the progressive rock world, but in the free improvisation world in the late 60s, early 70s. He's improvising with the likes of very avant-garde musicians like Derek Bailey. Jamie Muir, even for the free jazz world, has a very avant-garde approach to music. Whereas Derek Bailey is trying to take the guitar to the limits of what the guitar can do sonically, Jamie Muir's not even interested in instruments. He's interested in junk. This is a guy that saw the artistic possibilities of refuse, of cast-offs. This is almost like the antithesis of what King Crimson is at that time. So Robert Fripp's inclusion of Jamie Muir is incredible. And I think Jamie Muir's spirit goes through this band, right through Starless, the Bible Black and Red. Bill Bruford has spoken that probably the most important thing that happened to him educationally was working with Jamie Muir. And Jamie Muir's total approach to music, where he really believed that the musician should serve the music and not the other way round. Jamie Muir comes into this band. Before that, he's been working in a whole bunch of different groups, including the sort of improvising prog band Sunship with a very young Alan Holdsworth. You know, he's exploring a whole ton of different areas before he comes into this band. Now, on an earlier album, Lizard, you can hear that Fripp is bringing in the sort of cream of avant-garde British jazz at that point. And I'm trying to remember the pianist that he brings in on that album. Very famous jazz pianist, and when you get to my age, your memory goes, so I'm going to have to look this up, I'm afraid. Keith Tippett. Yeah, the great jazz pianist Keith Tippett, who appears on Islands. So, although I think Robert Fripp is very controlled and organised, he's trying to create almost like an antithesis, I think, within the music by bringing in musicians like this. Jamie Muir is possibly the most furthest out avant-garde musician to work within the progressive rock genre in the classic era of the 1970s. He really brings an attitude and approach to this album. So what do we have on this album, and how does his approach, influence what's going on this album? Well, it opens up with Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 1. Larks, Tongues and Aspic is a sound and a set of themes that Fripp and King Crimson are going to return to over and over again over the next 30 or 40 years. On this album we have Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 1, which opens the album, and Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 2, which closes the album. If you read interviews with Robert Fripp, he felt that those would be the bookends of the perfect King Crimson gig. So there's a thought towards this band playing live, and we've got these 2 behemoth tracks. Now, Larks, Tongues and Aspic is a very interesting track. It opens up with Jamie Muir. It opens up with what sounds like bicycles and rattles, and this sound builds and builds. It's exploring a sound world which is entirely Jamie Muir, and this sort of with the sort of inclusion then of this incredible drum roll by Bill Bruford, it goes into what can only be described as heavy metal. And this is a heaviness that we haven't really ever heard, even in heavy metal. Black Sabbath maybe, but there's a heaviness to this. When I was a young listener, listening to lots of heavy metal, and I bought this album and that riff kicks in, for me it sounded heavier than anything I'd ever heard in my life. There's a darkness to it, there's a threatening, satanic aspect to that riff, and that comes out into some really almost like Miles Davis, but sort of Englishy Miles Davis approach to improvisation, really coloured by Jamie Muir again. and then it goes into an extended violin solo by David Cross. Now, of course, here we are in 1973. We have David Cross taking a violin. So how much was this influenced by the Mahavishnu Orchestra? I don't know. I feel there's a strong Mahavishnu Orchestra influence on this track at least, if not the whole album. This track is very jazzy, it's very dark, it's very avant-garde, exploring free jazz, heavy metal, noise, really orchestrated. And this is then contrasted between the second track on the album, which is Book of Saturday, which then uses John Wetton. Now, John Wetton had sort of been standing around trying to get the gig with King Crimson for a while. Before that, he'd played in Family. John Wetton was an absolute major talent, an incredible bass player with a signature bass sound, I think, for progressive rock, a big, thick, beautiful bass sound, an incredible voice, a brilliant singer, and also he had pop star good looks. He could front a band. Now, John Wetton's going to go on to eventually form the band Asia and sell about 15 million albums, making sort of FM friendly rock. But if you go and listen to that first Asia album, it's still dripping with progressive rock. So this is interesting that Fripp has got on the one side Jamie Muir, the sort of fire breathing avant-garde performance art percussionist in the band, and he has the sort of almost like pop star frontman in John Wetton. This is something that King Crimson hadn't got. That's really interesting. You put those two things together. Book of Saturday, which is written by John Wetton and Robert Fripp, is a beautiful, touching ballad, which is an incredible guitar solo by Robert Fripp on there. Then it goes into Exiles, and Exiles was sort of a live staple, and we're in sort of classic progressive rock territory here. Of all the tracks on this album, this is the one that probably harks back to the King Crimson that went before. Really interesting tune, a lot more formal, organised progressive rock. And so there's a number of aspects we've seen here, and what we've got here is instrumental, vocal, okay? 3 tracks, side one's over. We turn it over, and we now have Easy Money on side 2. Easy Money sounds unlike anything in King Crimson's catalogue. It's sort of like the signature piece of this album. It's a sort of funky, slow funk, heavy metal song. I absolutely love it. I love Bruford's approach to drumming on here. It's definitely a group effort. It sounds like it's come out of a jam session. We don't really hear anything like it on Starlight of the Bible Black or Red. By the time we get to Red, they've really developed this sort of heavy metal dark sound, this twisted dark sound, and sort of the improvisationary approach. And Red is very formal. They've been able to really organise it well. Easy Money is quite sprawling. And again, Jamie Muir's input here is just incredible. Without that, we would be... It would almost be like a track by Free, maybe, I don't know. But with Jamie Muir's bizarre, talking frogs and blips and baps in the background, it has an incredible approach. We then go into, which I'm pretty sure is an improvisation, because it's credited to Cross, Fripp, Wetton, Bruford and Muir, is Talking Drum. And it sounds exactly like what it says. This is the blueprint for what King Crimson are going to be doing when they reform in the early 80s with Adrian Belew and Tony Levin. This is exploring that sort of North African sound with these bubbling sort of talking drum sounds and these improvisations. A lot of people felt that band came out of nowhere in the early 80s, but no, you can hear the roots here, right? Talking drum, again, sounds like nothing else that this version of the band are going to record. And then we finish off with Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 2, which has become one of King Crimson's their sort of most famous compositions, and it's a sort of stabbing, heavy metal, angular track, which is going to really, lay the groundwork for progressive metal and industrial metal. It's a lot more formalised than Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 1, and it's interesting, when you put those two together. They then did Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 3 at the end of... which album would it be? 3 of a Perfect Pair. And then there's a Larks, Tongues and Aspic Part 4, which I think is multi-parted on Construction in Light, is it? I'm not too sure. And then there's a track called, is it called Level 5, which is on what's the last album they did, Reason to Believe. I'm not so well knowledgeable about these later King Crimson albums, but the point is that Larks, Tongues and Aspic has been carried on. Let's just make sure I get this right. So I'm just having to no, I'm not going to be able to get there in time. Yes, part 4 is on Construction in Light. I got that right. And then level 5 is off The Power to Believe. Right, Reason to Believe is a track by Tim Harding. See, when you get old, I know that it's not the Cogs, haven't you? The Power to Believe, yeah, level 5, which is a 7-minute track that was on that album. Sorry about that. Like, as you know, anyone watches these channels, I go in without much research. I'm doing this from my heart, and sometimes I cannot pull it all out of here. For me, Larks, Tongues and Aspect is the most wide-ranging of all the albums from this version of King Crimson. Starless and the Bible Black is really exploring the sort of improvisatory area that they were exploring live at that time. And Red then formalises that into very tight compositions. This album explores a much wider range of sounds for me, and is far more interesting for that. Of these 3 albums, the first one I ever got was Larks, Tongues and Aspic, and I think it remains my favourite. This is one of the greatest progressive rock albums ever made. Right, it comes out in the classic year 1973 when prog's at its peak, but it's evidence that prog musicians were thinking about the future of progressive rock and where it would go, and I think Fripp was a leader. This is where we see the cracks starting to appear in progressive rock, and I think Fripp exposes those cracks here and really opens up a fracture within progressive rock, if you excuse my pun there. So anyway, that is my take on Larks, Tongues and Aspic. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this video, please like it. If you want to see more of my videos, if you like watching me forgetting what I'm talking about and having to look stuff up on Wikipedia, if that's the sort of thing you like, then like and subscribe. I do apologise for that. And if you want to support me in making these videos, then please become a patron, and there's the links down there. When I do that, that's not just me sort of having a little arm movement. That was me pointing down to the link that's below. It's not really below, that's my knee, but below there in your world is a little link, and if you click on that, it will take you to my Patreon. Go and have a look now. You won't have to spend any money. You can just see all the things you're missing. Hundreds of articles, videos, radio shows, recordings, all sorts of bonkers stuff is there for my patrons. I'm about to record a Patreon video now. I'm going to be going through this album here. I'm going to be looking at this album by Joe Zawinul from 1989, which is an album that's not discussed that much. I'm going to be playing it on my record player. You'll actually be able to hear some music over on Patreon, maybe. Right, if YouTube doesn't block it. YouTube will block even videos that are unlisted and private. It's very weird. But anyway, I am rambling on. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, I've said all that, haven't I? I'm going to go. I'm just going to go. Oh, I lost my way a bit there at the end, didn't I? I was right. I was right on it until I tried to remember those 2 other Larks, Tongues and Aspics. I shouldn't have even mentioned that. Now I'm just rambling on, aren't I? I'm just rambling on. But of course, anybody who knows my videos, at the end it always gets a bit weird. And I'm going to get out of here because I can sense it's going to get weird if I carry on talking. I'll see you on the next video. Bye.